In this video, I'm gonna go over some Webflow basics that will allow you to go ahead and build your very first website right after this video. Now, this is definitely a beginner video, so if you already know Webflow, then go ahead and you can skip this one. But for all the beginners out there, this is a very, very powerful video that will help you start your progress in no code and also UI design. So let's get started. Right over here on the left side, we've got the elements panel, which allows you to add any element. Now, it's split up into different sections. So we've got the layouts, the basics, typography, CMS, media, forms, and then also components. Now, the most important ones are definitely the layout ones, the section, the container, grid, and columns. Now, I don't really use columns or a container, but I definitely use div blocks and buttons. Now, sections will allow you to separate the most important pieces of your information. So you've got your hero, you've got your feature section, and then you've got your contact, right? You want to be able to separate those by sections. Then we've got layouts. I don't really recommend that you use any of these layouts just because they're quite clunky and they don't really work too well. So then we've got symbols. We've got the navigator, which is essentially your layer panel. It allows you to see everything from the top down so you can really see what's going on your project. Then we've got your pages. So if you build a home page, then you also want to build an about page. You also might want to build a terms page, a checkout page, a this, a this, a this. So you'll be able to see everything right here. Then we've got CMS, we've got a e-store or a e-commerce store, and then also your image panel or your assets panel. Now for this video, we're not going to go over CMS, e-store, e-commerce store, or crazy interactions. We're just going to do the most basic stuff that will allow you to get started right away. Okay, so let's get out of the assets panel and let's go overhead to the next side. On the right side, we've got the designer. Now this will allow you to essentially customize all the elements that we just talked about, the divs, the containers, the sections, the typography, the images, the this, that. This will allow you to control everything. This is what gives you full control. Now, the most important parts here are the size, the spacing, and then if you are using typography, then obviously typography. But image, gradients, borders, and effects aren't really important for you as a beginner. Then we've got the settings of an element, if it does have any. We've got the style manager. So as you add styles as in your CSS, you'll start to see them here. And then you've got more advanced interactions, which we're not going to go over in this video. So let's get started. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually build something so that you guys can actually see how we do this in real life, in real time. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do here is go ahead and click Command K, which will pop up a search function, which allows you to search for elements. So the first thing we're going to do here is add in a section, and we can just type that in, and then we're going to click inside of the section and go ahead and type in nav. Now watch out here because there's a sticky nav and then nav bar. Don't use the sticky nav, use the nav bar. So once that's there, we're going to go ahead and click on the nav bar, go ahead into the background and reduce that transparency. Now that allows us to have a transparent background with whatever color we decide to add to the section as well. Now, one really fast way to move around in Webflow is to actually click on a component and move around its parent elements. So this will allow you to jump to the section without having to go into the layer panel and then clicking on the section. It's almost like a shortcut to that parent element if you know where it is. So the next thing we're going to want to do is go ahead to the section that we just added and add in a div block. Now we want to give some dimension to the section, so we can add a class to it and call it section number 1, give it a width of 100% and give it a height of something like 800 pixels. Now we can see that the actual section has expanded, but the div is still here on top. So what we want to do here in the div is go ahead and expand this to be 100% as well. And then we can add another div block inside. So this div block will add as our sort of container for all the components that we add within. So we're going to want to be able to move this div block inside of our actual div block. So we want to do that using the layout. So in the layout here, we've got some options, but the most important one is definitely the flex layout. Now, if you don't know what the flex layout is, it essentially allows you to align things, whether it's center, vertical, left, right, up, down. It allows you to move things within containers or within sections, divs, whatever it is. So let's go ahead and align it to the center both ways. And now we have this div block here. Now this div block will give it a height of around 80% and a width of also around 70%. Now in here, what we're going to want to do is add in a grid. Now we can do that by searching it, and then we get this. So we're going to want to delete one of the rows, and I'll explain why we're actually using a grid instead of a div. A grid allows us to be able to move things once we go down into the lower breakpoints. Now, one thing to note in Webflow, which is also very important, is that the breakpoints work downwards. So if you're designing in the base breakpoint, which is outlined by the star here, you'll essentially be changing everything here on and downwards. If you change something in the mobile mode, it won't necessarily reflect it on the higher levels, right? So let's continue. Now over here in the grid, we can go ahead and start adding in our information or our components. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a div inside of this grid. And within that div, we can actually start adding in our components. So I can go ahead and start adding a heading. I can add a paragraph. I can add in a button, and we almost already have a working hero. But let's go ahead and give it some context. I'm going to add some fake text here and some fake styles, so bear with me. Okay, so now that we've got this right here, we can go ahead and start styling it. So I'm going to change the size here to be around 60 pixels and change the height to be 1 and then a hyphen. This paragraph, we're going to change it to a 20. And you can see that it automatically gives it a class once we add a custom size or custom color. Then we're going to want to change the size of the button as well to be around 250 pixels by 60. Then we'll do the exact same thing with the flexbox. We'll align it vertically and centered, and then change the size as well to be 20 pixels. Then we've got the spacings. Now, spacings work in this way. There's margin and then there's padding. One really easy way to explain margin padding is that margin pushes elements on top and padding essentially pushes the elements inside inwards. So if I go into X-ray mode for a second, you'll be able to see these hash lines over here. So if I go ahead and add some more padding here, you'll see that those hash lines increase. So now those green lines have increased all the way up, and it has essentially pushed the sign-up text to be very constrained. So we'll go ahead and reduce that all the way down to 0, and then we'll give it some padding of around 40 pixels. Now the top here, we're gonna add some padding as well by around like 20, and then we can see that this is already looking pretty good. But I wanna style it a little bit more, so what we're gonna do here is go into the body and go ahead and give it a gradient. We can do that by going into the background, clicking image and gradient, and clicking the plus. Now there's a couple different methods to do this. There's the image gradient, which you just drop in an image. There's a line, a radial, and then an overlay. For this, we're just gonna use the linear, and I'm gonna paste in a few colors that I already have. Okay, so now that we've got these colors, we can go ahead and change the angle to be maybe something around this. I'm just eyeballing it here, and then we can change the dimensions as well. So now that we've got that, we can go ahead into the heading and change that color as well. So we can make this white. We can also change this to be white, and then we can change the button to be white as well. But then that changes the color of the text, so we have to go ahead and change that as well. We can use something like black, or we can actually use this color dropper here, this eyedropper, and pick something close to this blue. Now this is looking pretty good, but there's something quite wrong with it, right? There's no image here on the right side, so let's go ahead and do that. In this section here, we can just go ahead and click in the grid and go ahead and add in an image. So this image, we can go ahead and change it to one that I've already downloaded or already added, and we can see what that would look like. So that by default looks pretty good, but let's go ahead and change these links. And now one way to do this would be to just go ahead into the colors and change the color in all of them individually. But what we're going to do here is give it a class of nav and go ahead and do that to all of them. And then we can go ahead and change the color to white. Now one thing to note there is that if an element shares a class with another element and you change a color or a text size or whatever it is, then it will do for all the elements that share that class size, just like it did here. So let's go ahead and add in our brand image, and that'll just be my logo for now. We can resize this using the slider right here. And then I'm just going to give it some padding, maybe make it a little bit smaller. So I've gone ahead and made this super basic, super simple hero. Now it's not the prettiest, it's not the best one, but it's definitely a working hero. And what we're gonna wanna do now, and which is very important, is make this scalable down to the lower breakpoints. So we can go ahead and change this in the tablet one and go all the way down to the mobile. Now, one of the benefits of using scalable systems like percentages, REMs, EMs, and things like that is that once you build it in the desktop one, it's much easier to scale it down instead of using pixels. But for this tutorial, it's completely fine to start building in pixels if it makes the most sense to you. There's no problem in learning that first. So right here, we'll be able to see exactly what I meant with when I said that using grid instead of a div was easier to scale down. So if we go ahead and click into the grid, we go into the settings here, we can go ahead and change the columns to be only one column and then rows to also just be 2. So that's how easy that is. The information automatically shifts down, but there's a simple problem here. What if I want the image to be on top? So one way to do that is if you just click in the actual grid, or you click into one of the children of the grid, you can go ahead and move that manually. You click that manual button right there, and that allows you to just drag it up. Now you see that the image is on top and the text is on the bottom. So that's super, super simple. And if we want to, we can give this a bigger width to make it a little bit more appealing, and also some padding on the bottom. So we can see here one of the issues of using pixels instead of REMs and percentages, things like that, is that that information is static. So if we have a hero that is 720 pixels like we added before, or 800, then it essentially stays in that way. So what we want to do here is go ahead and change this to 100% as well. So now if you go down to horizontal mobile, we'll see that that's much more scaled down. But there's another issue with pixels. We see that the typography says that we use is 60 pixels, which is quite large. So we can go ahead and change this down to around 40 and change this from 20 to maybe something around like 16. That's a little bit small, so we can go ahead and change that to 50 and maybe change the height to maybe 1.2. Then we want to change this button to be full width. So we go ahead and change this to 100%. And as we go all the way down, extend this a little bit to see a more realistic view. And so now what we have here is a scalable working hero. So if we go into the desktop, into the preview mode, we'll be able to see that this is a real hero. It's got a real working button. These are real buttons. And if we open this drop down, we see that we've also got the buttons there. So what have we learned in this video? We've learned how the UI UI works, how the designer works. We've learned how to style the background. We learned how to style images, text. We've learned how to scale things, how to bring them down, how to add images, how to change the text, how to add classes. Now this alone should get you working quite quickly. If you guys want to try Webflow for the very first time, then make sure that you use the link in the description. It will help out the channel. So thank you for that. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys enjoyed it, then make sure that you leave a like down below and tell me exactly what you want to see next video, because I do appreciate your suggestions. Now we recently just hit 6K subscribers, which is absolutely insane. And I just want to thank you guys so much for subscribing. If you guys want to see more videos just like this one, then let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.